Hello everyone, I'm Wally Wood with another special edition of the World in Review. If the names Stokely Carmichael, Abbie Hoffman, Tom Hayden, and Eldridge Cleaver mean anything to you, we have one of those gentlemen in our studio today. Now, I'll be back to introduce him to you in just a moment. And we welcome you back to this special edition of the World in Review. I'm Wally Wood. Good evening. As I said at the outset, there was a time in this nation's most recent history when the names of Stokely Carmichael, Tom Hayden, Abbie Hoffman, Eldridge Cleaver, and a host of others were as common as you could possibly get, and they were synonymous to certain heroes, but they were heroes in a certain faction of our society. In our studios today, we are pleased to have Mr. Eldridge Cleaver. He's not necessarily the same man that walked our streets and was engaged in the campus revolutions back in the 60s, and I say not the same man because he's turned his life around since then. But nonetheless, he is in our city on a very short visit, and he's touring the country right now, delivering a message on college campuses that he calls America's Future and the World Revolution. Now, just as a little bit of a background, and before I turn it over to Mr. Cleaver, back during his revolutionary days, he wrote a book entitled Soul on Ice. And then following his conversion to Jesus, he came out with a second book entitled Soul on Fire. Now, as a kind of a background and a foundation on what you're doing now, Eldridge, if you don't mind my calling you by your first name.
Please do.
Tell us, first of all, about the man himself. How did you ever, what was your background, your home life as you were growing up, and how did you ever get caught up in the revolutionary days of the 60s at all?
Well, I come from Little Rock, Arkansas. I was born into a Christian home. Both my grandfathers were ministers, and they were after me for the first 12 years of my life to make me a minister. But because of the influence of my father, I imagine, and the kinds of experiences that I had in my life, my family breaking up and so forth, I went in the opposite direction, and I ended up becoming a juvenile delinquent and getting into trouble with the law and becoming a very bitter and rebellious individual who ended up in jails and confinement in the state of California, and full of resentment against society. And also this was taking place during the civil rights struggle, when there was a lot of violence going on, and as a black person I became very resentful along the racial issue, and I was really confused about what was going on in the world with all these wars of liberation and revolution going on in Africa and Asia and Latin America. I couldn't understand what they were about. I couldn't see any common thread between them. So I began a course of study to try to figure all this out, and eventually I came to the Communist Manifesto. And it was reading the Communist Manifesto in that volatile period of our history and during the late 1950s, reading it while I was angry and resentful. This led me to be sympathetic, and it led to me accepting the communist ideology. And as we came into the 1960s with the war going on in Vietnam, along with the black rebellion in America and all the free speech movement and the dirty speech movement on college campuses, you know,
yes.
I found myself in the middle of this, and I wrote a book that was part of that whole movement. And because I was a speech maker and a writer, I ended up getting into some leadership positions, and I joined the Black Panther Party, and that got me into some shooting scrapes with the police department. Well, during all this time I was a communist and a Marxist, and I just felt that America was the worst government in the world, and that capitalism was the worst economic system in the world. And seeing the world through the communist ideology, I dedicated myself to doing what I could to try to undermine or destroy the American government and our economic system.
Here you were raised in a country that gave you the freedom to do that. What was your primary cause in wanting to see that country torn apart? Why were you not like most Americans who could see through the smokescreen and see that the real threat was not America, but the communist ideology itself? What did you see in value of that?
Well, I think I don't really agree with you that most Americans really feel that. I think that a lot of Americans don't really appreciate the freedom that we have. And I was one of those that, because America was defined as the worst country in the world by the people who hate America, and given the provocation of the violence along the color line, I think you can see how I could have a negative interpretation of America, even using the freedoms. This is something that's ironical. We use the freedoms of America to try to tear America down, but we didn't really understand that this was freedom. So when I left America and went to live in communist countries and these third world countries, that's when I had something to compare America with. And when I experienced communism and how it treats people and how it's organized and what its principles are, because, you know, when you just read the book, it's sort of like reading poetry. It sounds good. Yeah. But when you go to live in the country itself and have that living experience, that wakes you up. And that's what happened to me.
So you were saying that by and large, it was more or less a spirit of naivety and blindness that not only overwhelmed you, but a majority of those who were in the same boat with you,
and
right?
And spiritual darkness.
Yeah.
Because I rebelled against the gospel of Jesus Christ because of some of these same influences. Marxism teaches you that religion is evil and that it's the problem. It helps to oppress people. And since I was angry at oppression...
Since you were already there, it gave the ideology something to work with, which apparently is the norm, that something of this nature, the ideology of communism, socialism, things like the revolution, begins and finds its deepest roots in a bed of revolution or rebellion, a bed of rebellion that has already been there.
See, all of us go through a kind of a phase of trying to decide which way to go, and we challenge and test everything.
Trying to find ourselves.
I think it was because I grew up in that particular time in American history when the country was in basically a state of anarchy over the war and black rights, that I was influenced in that direction. And so the communists, they go out of their way to preach against religion and against Jesus Christ, because they have to get God out of the picture in order to make the state into God. I never understood that at first. I thought they were just trying to educate people to the evils of religion. They say religion is the opium of the masses, and that it blinds us and keeps us docile while we're being exploited. But what they really want to do is get God out of the picture so that
the state can take over.
That's right.
Yeah. Did you flee this country, or did you leave on your own volition? Were you running from?
I was running from the authorities. I had gotten arrested because I had participated in a gunfight with the Oakland Police Department in April of 1968. But I got out on bail, and at that time, Governor of California was Ronald Reagan, and he was very angry that they had let me out on bail, and so he helped take the case up onto a higher court, and they ordered me to go back to jail. And I had a little running room there before they could get me back to jail, so I left the country as a fugitive and went to Cuba.
How were you received?
Oh, they gave me a red carpet. Before leaving America, I went to the United Nations and met with the Cubans and other communist governments and some of these Arab governments and black African governments. And I decided to go to Cuba, number one, because it was a communist country close to America. And number two, because the communists in Cuba claimed that under Fidel Castro, they had gotten rid of all racial problems, and that everybody got along like brothers and sisters there. So this was interesting to me because I was concerned about racial problems. And as a communist, I thought this was the best place to go. So I made a little arrangement with the Cubans to go there to head up a training facility that other Black Panthers and American revolutionaries could come and be trained in. And so I went to Cuba when I left here.
You were looking for utopia?
Oh yeah, I was looking for utopia, and I believed that communism was taking us to utopia. So having been influenced by Cuban propaganda, I thought that I was getting ready to get my first taste of utopia by going to Cuba.
And what did you find when you got there?
I found the opposite of utopia. I found a big penitentiary on an island, a whole penitentiary, a whole country organized the way that a penitentiary is organized. See, some people think you have to have a wall around a place to make it a penitentiary.
Yeah.
But it's the way that it's structured that makes it that way. And with that dictatorship, and Fidel Castro turned out to be the warden of Cuba. And the people were unhappy with the way he was doing things, the fact that they didn't have any kind of control over the decisions of the government. The only thing they had was a suggestion box. And the government controls all the property and all the factories, what little factories they have there. And I was really shocked to see that people in Cuba hate Fidel Castro, because we over here, we was loving Fidel Castro and holding him up as somebody. And I got over there and people were talking about him like he had a tail. And, you know, this was, at first I didn't believe this. I thought they was trying to trick me or test me or something. But then I just ran into so many people who had all these, to them Fidel Castro is like an evil devil.
Yeah.
Who kills people and tortures them and locks them up in prison just for speaking their mind, closing down the churches and persecuting people. And when I saw this, I said, well, this is not what I'm fighting for.
Yeah.
Because I was fighting for freedom. I wanted to see people free of any kind of oppression and stuff like that from the government. And then I went over there and saw that it was worse than anything that we had in America. And so this was the beginning of my waking up. But I didn't just turn against communism, I just turned against Cuban communism. And I stayed there for 8 months. And then I left there and went to Africa, to Algeria.
Now, how old were you at the time?
I was about 34 when I left the country.
And
I'd have to stop and count.
and it's kind of a disconcerting thing to find yourself that old and having to grow up for the first time in your life.
Well, it is, because you think you're already grown up.
Yeah,
you see.
yeah. And in the process, admit during that process that those that you counted as your enemies before were perhaps right all along, and that you were the one who was wrong. How were you treated while in Cuba? Were you given any preferential treatment to go about that which you wanted to do, or did you find yourself becoming as much of a slave as everybody else there?
No, they gave me a preferential treatment. They gave me a big, pretty penthouse apartment right in the center of Havana.
Now, did you see that as preferential treatment as well?
Yes, I did. I saw that as them treating me as an honored foreign guest.
Okay.
And they don't treat their own people that way, see?
Right.
But, this was something that you find in many countries where they will give some special treatment to foreigners because they want to impress them. And
especially those who are advocating their cause in a propagandized way.
Yeah. Well, it turned out that what they were interested in me was in impressing Americans to use them against the American government. They wanted the so-called new left on their side. They wanted us to support them against the foreign policy of the United States of America. So that's good in New York and in America. But when you come to Cuba, what they're worried about is how you will influence their own people there. Because you see, Americans are funny people. Americans don't sit still for oppression, and they speak out. And so when I got to Cuba and I saw that stuff going on, I wouldn't sit still for it.
All of a sudden, you found yourself being an American.
Listen, and see, American has an experience with freedom.
Yes.
And so when an American gets subjected to oppression, he rebels against it. We got in us, give me liberty or give me death.
And it's in our blood.
I said, I'm not going to stand up and argue with my own government and fight against my own government and then come down here, this little banana republic, and close my eyes to this stuff. So this got me into a lot of arguments with the Cubans because I wouldn't sit still for it. I wouldn't shut up when I'd see things that was wrong.
So you left there and went to Africa, and then what?
Well, I stayed in Africa for 4 years. My wife joined me in Africa, and we had 2 children there, a son born in Algeria in 1968, and a daughter born in North Korea in it was 1969 my son was born in Algeria. My daughter was born in 1970 in North Korea during the trip that we took there. And we spent the 4 years that we lived in Algeria traveling throughout the communist world, throughout the Arab world, and throughout Black Africa. And what I had seen in Cuba was amplified in all these other countries. I didn't find one single communist country that was anything near like what they teach it is in terms of freedom. What I saw was the people like the Gulag, what Solzhenitsyn talks about, the prison system over there. And we all can see this in Poland right now, Wally, if you don't mind if I call you Wally.
Go ahead.
We can all see that the Polish people are rebelling against the dictatorship. Well, when I went to Poland, they wasn't rebelling like they are now, but they was outspoken against the stuff. And they have that kind of movement in every one of those communist countries. And when they see you a foreigner, and they can see from the color of my skin that I wasn't no Czechoslovakian or nothing like that. So they open up a little bit to you, you know, and tell you what's going on there. And it really shocked me to find out that I had been so deceived.
And it's amazing. So you left Cuba thinking that, well, maybe that was just a bad apple in the bunch.
Yeah.
That especially going to Africa, I mean, I'm going back to my roots now.
Mm-hmm.
Surely I'm going to find the utopia that I'm looking for.
And brotherhood and love and all that.
Only to have found that the very thing that you were advocating, the evil of it was being echoed over and over and over again.
All I found was dictators and totalitarian political machinery and unhappy people. Mm-hmm. Now, the people were wonderful. I love the people of Cuba. I love the people in Africa, Algeria. I love the people in the communist countries. But it's the communists themselves,
the leaders,
and their government, that these people are evil, and they know what they're doing. They're full of excuses, but they're living high on the hog, driving around in big cars, wearing good clothes, and partying, and hiding behind all this rhetoric about they're fighting for a better world.
Right.
They're not fighting for a better world. And they constitute a new kind of a ruling class that owns everything. I mean, you know, people complain about rich people in various parts of the world and even in our own country, but in those countries, those are the most richest people in the world because they own everything. They own the whole country. They own the people too. Mm-hmm. And so you find them really greedy and greasy and contemptible.
Yeah. How did all this lead to your acceptance of the Lord?
Well, I was so shocked that I had been so wrong that it just challenged me down to my boots. But the thing that started the spiritual sparks to fly into my life was my little children. When my son was born and my daughter was born, and I got to looking at them and seeing a combination of my wife's features and my features in their faces. And my daughter inherited these Cleaver ears. You see, these ears run in my family. Many people in my family got these big ears. My daughter inherited them. And I remember in Algeria looking at my children, I said, wait a minute. Now, how in the heck could this happen? I said, ain't no way in the world that this could happen by accident, you know. The communists teach this accident. Life is an accident with no purpose. Mm-hmm. And I said that something had to design this and make this come out like this because it's too perfect. It's too well designed for it just to be...
you mean the fact that she had ears that looked like yours proved to you it was no accident?
Yeah, but the idea of a man and a woman coming together and producing another being that combines the two.
Yes.
I mean, it took something real smart to put that together. And so I just started thinking about all of the balance and orbit that I could see in the universe. And, you know, I used to believe in this Big Bang theory of evolution, but I started thinking, well, look, whenever I made a big bang or a little bang, it didn't end up with no kind of order. It ended up in chaos. So how are we going to have a big bang in the universe and end up with all these pretty patterns and balance and orbits and all this regularity? No, sir. I began to see the hand of the Creator, starting with seeing it in my children, and that began my quest and my search. I didn't turn immediately to Jesus Christ, but I started thinking about God and just being open to spiritual things, and eventually I had a vision of Jesus Christ, and I saw then the reality, and I submitted my life to Jesus Christ. And that's what changed me, and that's what made me want to surrender. Because the Lord told me, Eldridge, you come on and go back home and don't worry, it'll all be worked out. Now, I didn't know. See, I was facing 75 years in the penitentiary for what I had done, and I didn't know. For instance, the main policeman who was a witness against me had become a Christian himself. The Lord had touched his life.
Oh, really?
And so I was guilty for some things that we did that night, but I wasn't guilty of all the things they accused me of. And so in order for them to make me guilty of all those things, this policeman would have had to lie a little bit on me, and he refused to do that. And so he told the truth.
Had you two gotten together before all this started coming to pass?
No, I didn't even know this. I didn't know that the man had a spiritual experience. One day when I was going to court, the district attorney said, Eldridge, here's somebody who wants to meet you. And he took me to this man and introduced me to him. I didn't even know him before. I just knew his name from the legal documents. And this man told me, he said, you know, Eldridge, I had you in my gun sights that night, and I started to blow your head off. I said, phew. Well, thank God you didn't. He said, praise the Lord. And then he told me how the Lord had touched his heart, you know. And he shook my hand and wished me good luck. He said, all that stuff is in the past.
Now, did he know you to be a Christian at this point?
Yes, he did.
Yeah, because I think it had already been announced in the press.
In the press, yeah.
Right, that you had.
And so what I'm saying, it just shows you how the Lord makes a way, because without them lying on me, then I was able to have my case handled in a calm way and settled in such a way that I think that God made it open for me to be able not to be behind prison walls today.
To be here today.
Yes,
right.
sir.
75 years is a long time.
It's long.
Okay, in the few moments we have left, we have about 9 minutes or so. Your message to America right now seems to be one in which you are warning her of something to come. Can you, in a nutshell, share with us what that is?
Well, what I'm concerned about is I think that we are really naive about the Communists. We think that the Communist Party is just another political party. But they have a master plan for world conquest, and the United States of America is the last hurdle between them and taking over the whole world. Many people don't understand this. See, there are a lot of countries that they haven't knocked over because they think it's good to make it look like they're not as powerful as they are. But they're planning day and night to see how to get rid of America. And I have no doubt that if they decide that the only way to do it is by attacking us militarily, they would do that if they thought they could get away with it. That's why I think we really have to keep our military uptight and strong so that they won't dare attack us. But then what they're also counting on is isolating us from the rest of the world, turning the rest of the world against us, and then dividing our people. Like they give money to any group in America that's creating trouble. They'll give money to groups like the Nazis. They'll give money to radical or militant organizations. They give money to environmental groups, the ACLU. It don't matter. Anybody who's shaking the boat in America, they'll give them money so they can keep on. And so what they want to do is turn Americans against their own country.
Yeah.
That's why I wear a flag in my lapel, because you go to many of these colleges these days and try to find a flag to pledge allegiance. You won't find them, because the communists have gone around systematically and stolen the flags because they want to undermine our nationalism and our patriotism and our unity so they can create as much dissension as possible. And that way, if we remain divided as a people, then we can't function in no kind of harmony.
So, would you agree that the foundation of this so-called separation of church and state issue that has risen its ugly head here of late, that has attacked the last vestibule of strength and foundation in this country, would you say that that's all part of the plan, too, in further dividing Americans from Americans?
There is no doubt in my mind, because I used to help teach that stuff, you see. See, the communists understand that patriotism is the glue that holds the country together. That's why when you try to salute the flag, they don't want you to do it. Or if you try to sing the national anthem, they start singing the Internationale. Because if you don't exercise these rituals, then the country falls apart and the differences between the people come out. Now, when you look back at these arguments that they put up against religion and so forth in our country, separation of church and state, the founders of America, they wrote the Declaration of Independence and signed it in a church. So you can't say that they was against religion. Or if they felt that way, then why didn't they take it to a saloon and sign it in a saloon or something like that out on the sidewalk? No, they didn't, because those men believed in God and they knew the value of God. That's why they said, "In God we trust."
What are you advising today's young people in their combating the very subtle attack that is coming against them?
Okay, I advise young people, black and white and all other colors in America, to take a firm stand on the Declaration of Independence, on the Constitution of the United States of America, to believe in the American dream and to stand up firm for democracy and believe that they have a good country and not an evil country, and that the people of the world want freedom and democracy, and that communism is what is evil, and not to let anybody turn them into enemies of their own country. And yes, we have problems in our country, but we can solve our problems. We don't have to sweep nothing under the rug. But if we believe in victory, and if we understand that God is our common Father, our common Creator, that we are brothers and sisters and common citizens of a common country, then I think that we would be on a good side and on a positive side, and we can solve our problems.
What about parents? What would you tell today's parents?
I think parents need to really get their act together and recognize that a lot of the disintegration that we have comes from the fact that we have failed as parents to pass on moral and ethical standards to our children, relying on the schools which haven't done it. I like to say that it's the policeman in the heart that we need to rely on instead of the policeman on the corner. But this country has become dependent on the penal code because the moral code, which was supposed to be passed on by our churches and by our families, hasn't been passed on because people ain't going to church anymore and the family is falling apart. And we got all these people walking around, they're uncivilized. They look like just ordinary people, but the behavior shows that we have developed a generation of savages in some of the behavior that is being exhibited. And the only way to civilize a savage is by teaching him or her the principles of civilization, the same way missionaries went around the world and converting people to a higher standard of behavior is what we've got to do amongst our own people. And I know that those are harsh words, but the reality is even harsher.
That's right.
And so we've got to understand that and deal with that.
The alternative is pretty final.
Yes, it is.
What concerning the body of Christ in this country, I have been convinced that there is a tremendous streak of naivety running through the church in this country. How would you, what would you say to the church in America?
Well, I think I'm modest in what I don't like to preach to preachers too much, but I will say that...
well, the church meaning not just the preachers, but also just the lay people.
I hear you there. But I say one of the things that really is a burden on my heart is all of this denominationalism. I think that we have taken it too far because we make Jesus Christ look like an octopus or something. Make him look like going in all these different directions when there's only one Bible, there's only one gospel, and one God and one Jesus Christ. And so we need to have more of an attitude of unity and less arguments over what men have said. God is not the creator of confusion and disunity. God is the author of a unified universe and human race of people that come in different varieties of color and hairstyle and all of that, but the sun rises for all of us. And I think that we need to have more unity because if the communists and their friends take control of the world, then they will exterminate all religion, and they won't come along and just spare certain denominations. They'll wipe all of it out. And religion is the hope of mankind because economics and politics can't solve our problems. Religion, spiritual message is what we need to get this devil out of our hearts and put God and Jesus Christ back on the throne of our lives.
I was just going to say, instead of saying religion, let's just put it where it is, Jesus Christ.
Yes, sir.
That's the salvation that we're talking about here.
I say that because, you see, we have too many arguments going on in this area. And I think that I turned to Jesus, and I'm so happy I did that. I feel like just jumping up and dancing right now.
Eldridge, thank you so much. It's an honor and privilege to have you with us. Would you do it for us again?
Thank
Come
you
back?
for letting me be here, Wally, and it's been my pleasure. And God bless all you people out there listening.
Praise the Lord. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Wally Wood. Tune in again for another special edition of The World in Review.